Hey.
Okay. Okay, I think we're good. Well, welcome everyone. We have a huge showing for those of you who can. I did put some announcements in the chat. You can screen up to the top to see some of those announcements. If you have your own announcements, you're welcome to put them in there as well. We're going to use the chat for communication because there's just so many of us. Please do make sure that your phones and your computers are on mute so that we're not hearing background noise. And we'll get started. So welcome. I'm super excited because we are actually 3 Master Recycler programs. We have Merriam County and Lane County also joining the Portland Metro region for this conversation today. My name is Lauren Norris. I run the Master Recycler program in the Portland Metro area. And we'll get started in a little bit, but I thought it would be fun for us to, because there's so many of us, we can't really get to know each other by talking to each other. So I thought we'd do a little fun kind of step in, step out game in order to get to know each other. And so, it might be a little clunky for folks who are not really used to using a computer. But if you want to, everyone who can and knows how to do it, go to your stop video and turn off your video. So everyone turn off your videos. So we're not going to see cameras. We'll just turn off all our videos. So it should be all blank screens. Just about everyone turned off their video now. Okay, so now, what's that? In order to turn off your video, there should be a little camera that says stop video. There you go. Yep. And so then what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to turn your video back on when I say something that is true about you, so that we'll get to know you a little bit. So if you live in Multnomah County, please turn on your videos and wave your hands and let everyone know the pride you feel for being a Master Recycler in the Multnomah County area. Woohoo! There we are. All right. So you can kind of scroll around to see the folks that are turned on their videos. Now everyone turn them back off again.
Mine never turned on.
And we're going to do Washington County. How many people are in Washington County Master Recyclers? Yay! We got our Washington County showing the love. Our West Side. Nice, thank you. Okay. How about Clackamas County? Everyone turn them off again. Turn them back on for Clackamas County. Get the southern side of our region going. Yay. All right. Nice. Thank you. It's great to see you all. We got someone from class 2. Nice. Good to see you, Sherry. Okay, Marion County. We got some visitors up from Marion County. Let's see the Marion County love. Yay.
Yeah. That's us.
Wow.
Nice. Great turnout. Thank you. And I think there were some folks from Lane County as well. Marion County shared it a little bit with the Lane County folks. A few? No? I guess not. I thought there was. Okay. How many of you have completed more than your 30-hour certification? So you're certified Master Recycler. Show yourself. Yay. All right. Now, those of you who have done over 100 hours, so we call you all Centurion Master Recyclers in our region. So that's show yourselves up, show the pride. How about 500? Yep. This is a special crew we call Quinn Centurions. So
Yay.
thank you to the Quinn Centurions. And we have a couple, we've got 4 now, Master Recyclers that have reported over 1,000 hours.
Not me.
You see those? We got Colleen. There we go. Good. Yay. All right. Well, we got a chance to see everyone a little bit and wave and show our love. So thank you so much for all that you do in the region. I know that many of you are actually still actively doing stuff in your community, even though it's gotten harder to do that. Um, and now is a really exciting time to continue to be involved, because I think we're going to see some from what we're going to hear from Sana and David, that we have some exciting changes that we can all be a part of helping get past. And so we're going to learn about them. We're going to hear some about what's the plan in terms of getting them passed, and then there'll be some opportunity for Q&A in and out throughout this presentation. So I will let Sana and David, please. I didn't get bios from you ahead of time. So I'll let you tell us who you are, but I did want to let you know that Sana is a master recycler from the Portland metro area in class 60. So she's a class 60 member. But will the two of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started in presentations. People can ask questions in the chat as we go along. If you have questions and you want to ask them in Spanish, please go ahead and ask your question in Spanish. I will interpret the question when we go into the question and answer time. I'll interpret the question for Sana and David, and Leticia will be interpreting the answers. Okay, so we'll go ahead and let Sana and David take over. Thank you so much for being here. We're really all very excited to hear about the great work you've been doing to get this far, and what we can do to help you get to the next stage with this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. I'll introduce myself and then let David introduce himself after that. Buenas tardes. My name is Sana Steenstra, and I work for Oregon DEQ in the Materials Management Program. As Lauren said, I'm a master recycler from Multnomah County. I've been with DEQ about 2.5 years, and previously I worked in the Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling Program. So now I'd like to invite David to introduce himself.
Thank you, Sana. This is David Alloway. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for sharing some time with us this evening. I'm David. I have been at DEQ for about 20 years. I am not a master recycler, but I have been speaking with the metro area master recyclers going back to around class 12 or so. So many of you I've seen at least once before, and I'm very glad you could join us this evening. We have some a very exciting story to tell. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. And David, how does the screen look? Can you see the slide?
Looks good to me. Okay,
great. All right, well, let me get my slides oriented. I think we're pretty good. So I'm going to give a little overview of sort of our plan for the evening, and then we will get into the exciting content. So we are going to do this presentation in 4 parts with discussion in between each. There's so much juicy detail, and I'm sure you'll all have lots of questions. So first we'll talk about understanding the problem and the issues that we're dealing with and discussing today. And then in the second part, after some discussion, David and I will talk about working towards the proposed solution for modernizing Oregon's recycling system, as we like to call it. And then again, pausing for discussion, we'll get into some key elements of the draft legislation. So some of the interesting details that are being proposed, and have some more discussion, and then wrap up with the next steps, just a few minutes on that, and then have a final time for final Q&A and more conversation. So it should be very interesting, and thank you again all for being here and for your interest. And so with that, we're actually going to get into our first poll, if Lauren is ready. So I will read it in English, and then I believe Lauren will read it in Spanish. So in English, I'll start. In your opinion, what is the most important area of the recycling system? Oops, we flipped them. Okay, that's okay. I'll read this one.
Oh, okay.
I'll just go with this one.
Oh,
That's
no,
on the
this
screen.
one. Do you want me to switch it? I could switch it back. Let me switch it. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay.
In the polling.
That was a preview, a hint for your poll later.
Yeah, sorry. That's
okay.
in your opinion? Okay, now I'm launching it.
Yes. Great. Okay. In your opinion, which of these changes to our recycling system is most important? Recycling more packaging, clearer product labels, avoiding contamination, guaranteeing that all collected material actually gets recycled, stop plastic from polluting the environment, and brands and manufacturers pay to support recycling.
So people are welcome to go ahead and start voting. So, and actually I think that Leticia probably interpreted while we went, but in case she didn't, en español, es en su opinión, ¿cuál de estos cambios en nuestro sistema de reciclaje es más importante? Reciclar en más envases de productos, prohibir las etiquetas engañosas, menos basura, no reciclable en los materiales recolectados. Ganas. I think she did this, so I'm repeating myself.
Looks like we have to select in both languages too.
Yes. Oh, you can pick. Okay.
It won't let you select if you just select an answer. You have to answer both questions. So.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Are they typed in the same sequence? Because my Spanish is very rusty.
Yes, they are. Thank you, everyone. So please just pick your one that in your language in both languages. It's the first time we've been able to do this. So
yes. Well, thank you for being willing to try the polls with us, Lauren.
I haven't done one in double languages either. So thank you for your patience. All right. Did everyone get a chance? We have a minute left here for polling. Everyone's gotten their vote in. How do we did you put a vote in, Rosie?
Hay que hacerlo en los dos lenguajes.
Oh, en los lenguajes hay un globo que se dice interpretación en su pantalla. ¿No se puede ver eso? Okay, I'm going to end the polling. And share the results. So you all can see where we were. Okay, it looks
okay. Fascinating.
Brands and manufacturers. Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you, Sana.
Great.
So
thank you. Yeah, and the poll. Thank you for giving your feedback, everyone. It's been very interesting to ask that question along the way. Thanks for sharing. So we're going to get into the first section of the presentation, understanding the problem. I also see, Lauren, some writing, like somebody could write on the screen, stop plastic pollution. Are other people seeing that too? It doesn't bother me if it stays there, but.
Yeah, folks, we're not in a webinar setting. So if you do put stuff on here, everyone's going to see it. So please be aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that person sharing their enthusiasm though. So, so getting into understanding the issues, there are many challenges some of you are probably very familiar with or have heard about in your education and outreach in the community, have learned about through the Master Recycler program. There was kind of an inflection point in 2017 and 2018, an incident or moment we call National Sword, when China and other countries began to stop accepting the recyclable materials that the US was exporting to them. These international recycling markets disruptions had happened before, actually, so recycling markets have always been somewhat volatile. So over the years, recycling has also experienced more economic challenges generally. It's just becoming harder for it to be stable and economically efficient and economically beneficial as time goes on, and that volatility hasn't gone away. So those are some of the big picture issues that have led to public confusion about what and how to recycle, high levels of contamination or unaccepted materials or trash in the recycling. This creates negative impacts on the recycling industry, such as the paper recyclers who have to sort out the plastics that come with the paper. And it also creates environmental and social impacts when our contamination is sent to other places or end markets where they aren't prepared to handle it, or it's not material they wanted. This causes higher costs for ratepayers, or the people who pay their garbage and recycling bills, who currently bear all the costs of the recycling system. And there are inconsistent recycling opportunities around the state. We have folks from different parts of the state on the webinar tonight, and there may be different recycling lists or drop-off opportunities or other education programs depending on where you are. And the processing facilities that sort our mixed recyclables, they are largely unregulated. And they also are struggling to sort out all the garbage and contamination that ends up at their facilities. And so we're unable to assure that all materials are being sorted and recycled responsibly. There are also missed environmental opportunities. We're landfilling material that could be recycled. And while this isn't necessarily the worst of these challenges, it is a missed environmental opportunity. And we know there are also inequities in access to recycling service, particularly for more rural communities, people who live in apartments and multifamily properties. There are inequities in the working conditions at those processing facilities, and just generally the distribution of the burdens of pollution related to recycling. So these are some of the issues, and they kind of culminate in a loss of public trust. When National Sword happened, you know, we heard an outcry from the public and the community, and because people felt that it wasn't right, that we could not guarantee that materials were being recycled responsibly. And there's also growing evidence that recycling exports from the US have been a significant contributor to plastics in the world's oceans, more than we thought before. So those are the problems that we see on the surface, the things we experience day to day, and many of them are the consequence of some deeper challenges. So first, environmental benefits from recycling and the economic signals in the recycling system are not aligned. This goes back to the volatility and economic challenges of recycling that I mentioned earlier. So recycling can reduce costs to society through reducing pollution and preventing climate change, but these benefits are not reflected in the economic signals that private industry and local governments have to respond to. The benefits just, you don't see them financially. The environmental benefits are not felt financially. So this also leads to an underinvestment in recycling activities and causes these issues we're highlighting. So second, Oregon's laws for recycling were not designed to respond to today's challenges. So Oregon's recycling framework was created over 30 years ago, and many things were different back then. The programs and their economics were driven largely by newspaper recycling. And today, as you all know, newsprint is largely gone. And plastics are much more ubiquitous today. We're just dealing with different materials and products. And 30 years ago, nobody thought or anticipated that we would mix our recyclables together, or that we would need special processing facilities to sort them all out, or that we would export those materials to distant lands with less environmental regulation or infrastructure. So those were all unanticipated things. And finally, there's a significant gap in responsibility, which you all responded to in the poll, involving consumer brands and manufacturers. These are the companies that make the products that we're primarily concerned about today, paper and packaging, and they have the unique power to influence changes in packaging and product design. They can also create market demand for recycled materials, addressing those economic issues that we talked about, and reduce price volatility, but they're largely absent from our current policy framework in Oregon. So those are the issues, both surface and everyday experience and root causes. And I'm gonna stop now for a moment and see if there are any questions or discussion at this point. Lauren, if you can help. I don't see questions in the chat yet, but if there are any, I'd be happy to take some.
People can type your questions in the chat. I also like to make room for folks who have called on the phone and aren't able to type a question in chat. If you have called in and can't type in, please go ahead and unmute and ask your question now. So how will we update these laws? Is a question in the chat.
Yes, great. We will be getting into the details of the proposed updates to our laws, but this has definitely been this project David and I have been involved with through DEQ for the last, well, David and I have been involved for about 1.5 years. It's been going on for more than 2 years. And it was looking at all those outdated laws, all those issues. There was a lot of research, and then we'll talk about the proposal later in the presentation to update our laws.
Okay, so there's a similar question that you'll probably be discussing in a bit. How do we deal with the if we put the burden of the cost on manufacturers? Won't the cost be passed on to the consumer?
Yeah, good question. This is a question we get quite often, and I'm just jumping in, but David, please chime in if you have something to add. We did some research, which David will kind of give an overview of. I think that's David's section. It's not in detail in the presentation, so I'm glad to answer it now. What we understand from the research that was commissioned for the project that we'll talk more about is that in other countries that have similar programs, the consumer does not experience a change in the price of the product because many of the brands and companies that are paying these prices are global or multinational or just at least national companies that spread out these costs across a very large consumer base. So the research that was done for this project didn't see a difference in the shelf price of products paid in one Canadian province that had a program like this, a producer responsibility program, compared to one that did not have a producer responsibility program. So the answer is yes, we do think they will pass costs on to consumers, but in a sense, it is not meaningful, or you will probably not experience that actual change in cost because it's so small spread across the consumer base.
There's a couple of questions about the current system right now and like what does happen with plastic right now, and also has markets improved in the last few years since China stopped accepting materials? So on the second question, has the markets improved? We do believe that we have heard from the recycling industry that markets have improved. It was kind of a crisis moment when this project started, and recently we have heard from both the collection companies, the material processors, and through them the end markets, that markets have improved.
there are new markets. It's not all going back to China or the same Southeast Asian countries as before. And so there has been some stabilization. But as I mentioned, National Sword was not the first time there was volatility in the market. So it still seems like issues we needed to address. And in terms of what happens with the plastic, there are many things that happen with plastic. There are some materials that are landfilled if there are no markets for them currently. Some go to a facility called Orpet that recycles, I think, mainly plastic bottles. And then many are still sold internationally. That's one of the primary materials that is still exported is plastics, and they are made into various products. So David, any other detail you would add on the plastics recycling question? Okay, great.
So I'm seeing a lot of good questions that are a bit about the manufacturers' roles, and I think you'll get into this some, but do we really see them wanting to play a role in this? Are there opportunity for strong lobby to make change with manufacturers, and also can they play a role in making materials more uniform so that it's one kind of tub or one kind of that kind of thing is what I'm seeing, several kind of lumping several questions in at once.
Great. Well, we are definitely going to answer those questions. I'll save some of that for the presentation that's coming up. And one thing I will say about uniformity of the products is the program that's being proposed here would encourage more environmentally beneficial design. DEQ doesn't necessarily have authority, I think, and David, correct me if you have a different interpretation. There may not be authority or as much support for dictating or prescribing how products are designed or changing manufacturers' specifications in terms of making products more uniform, like the same type of tub for a bunch of different products. So we don't see as much support for that, but we do see support for other things, and we will talk about that.
All right, so
Hey,
yep, David.
Lauren, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I would like to address the question about whether the public can counter the strong influence of the industry lobby. The question presupposes that everyone in industry is going to oppose this proposal. And 24 months ago, even 12 months ago, that would have been a fair assessment. However, there has been a sea change in the last 12 months. Industry is now highly divided on this topic, and a number of large consumer brands and trade associations have recently come out publicly supporting legislation that would do many of the same things that Oregon is proposing, including mandating that producers pay fees to share in the costs of expanding recycling and making the recycling system more responsible. And just by examples, these brands and business organizations include companies such as PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Dow Chemical, and the American Chemistry Council. So yes, there is a possibility that enough in industry will support this type of proposal that if coupled with a legislative effort supported by everyday people like all of us, we actually might get something passed.
I've seen a lot of questions about what can we do either to influence the businesses, influence our decision makers, or also just influence markets. What can we do to reduce the amount of things that are coming in packaging that we can't recycle? What can we do as individual states to get localized recycling so it doesn't have to be shipped over?
Okay, lots of good questions there. I wonder if, Lauren, you'll say anything at the end of the presentation about how folks can get involved. So maybe I'll leave that for you. And I might suggest moving on in the presentation because we'll answer a lot of these questions and we can come back to the chat if there were any that we didn't get to. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. I think in terms of master recyclers being involved, I'd also look to your local master recycler program. We're all going to be very invested in keeping our ear to the ground as to when things are coming up and how you can get involved. But we'll be discussing more at a later date with our region about what we can do, and we'll come up with some things. We'll decide together on some things. So yes, please continue the presentation. Thank you.
Great. David, back over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Sana, and thanks everyone for the great questions. So I'm going to share with you the history of how we came up with this proposed solution. Back in 2018, when the state was still reeling from China National Sword, DEQ convened the Recycling Steering Committee. And this group included representatives of 15 different organizations, local governments, Metro, the state, recycling collection companies, processing companies, industry organizations, a paper mill, a plastics user, and some non-profit groups. This group was facilitated by a group called Oregon Consensus, which is a program of Portland State University. And their sole mission is to help stakeholder groups find solutions to complex problems. And the recycling problem is a very complex one. This group operated according to a consensus model. That is, our charge was to find a consensus among all of the members, which we defined as a solution that everyone would be willing to live with. You didn't have to love the proposal, but you had to be willing to accept it. And that might be why it took 2.5 years for this group to complete its work. That is how long it took. The next slide, please.
David, while you're at a pause, sorry.
Yes.
There's a few people who entered the room who speak Spanish. I want to make sure they know how to connect. Hay algunos que vinieron tarde y yo quisiera explicar que si quiere escuchar esta presentación en español, busque para el símbolo como un globo que se dice interpretación y haz clic en español. Gracias. Thank you, David. Sorry.
Thank you. So the committee started by creating a charter, and the charter defined the mission and purpose of the Recycling Steering Committee. And in summary, its charge was to make recommendations to modernize Oregon's recycling system in order to meet 3 high-level goals. The first, to optimize environmental benefits using a life cycle perspective. So considering the whole life cycle of materials. Second, to create a resilient recycling system that can adapt to future changes in supply and demand. And finally, to restore and maintain public trust in Oregon's recycling system. The committee also agreed to 16 desired functions. I've not shown them all here, but just as examples, they included social equity, transparency and accountability, collecting clean materials, and many others. And these functions that we desire of Oregon's recycling system became the benchmarks against which different options were evaluated. So as the committee started studying different policies and different programs and options, we would keep coming back to these desired functions and ask, okay, does this policy option address, does it collect clean materials? Does it share responsibility? Does it ensure that materials reach in markets, and so forth? The committee also tried to advance several priorities in Oregon's 2050 vision, which is the state plan for sustainable materials management. And that state plan is much broader than recycling. It addresses prevention, reuse, and the reduction of environmental impacts across the full life cycle of materials. This steering committee was focused on recycling, and specifically the recycling of the common core materials that are typically collected at the curb from businesses and at drop-offs. The group was not looking at specialty materials like electronics, tires, motor oil, food, or toxics. So its charge was narrow around recycling, but within that charge, it was looking at reducing impacts across the life cycle. I mentioned the committee met for 2.5 years to study the problem and to evaluate and ultimately propose a stable and more equitable system for the future. The committee members met close to 100 times if you count all of the full committee meetings as well as the subgroups. So this was a very ambitious group that spent a lot of time. And next, I'll share with you a little bit about the research we conducted that informed the decision-making. So there was a lot of research that was performed on behalf of the steering committee because we wanted the committee to make its recommendations based on evidence. So, for example, we looked at policies and legal frameworks that are used in other states and other nations. And in doing so, we tried to identify policies and policy elements that might work in Oregon. And we also mixed and matched policies from different locations and combined them into several unique different scenarios. Again, those scenarios were evaluated against those desired functions that I mentioned previously. The group also began some long overdue exploration of social equity considerations. And by that, I mean considering both how benefits of our system are distributed and also burdens of our recycling system are distributed. So for example, not everyone in Oregon benefits from the same level of recycling service that residents of single-family households in the Portland area do. People that live in apartments often have less robust service. People that live outside of Portland, and especially outside of the Willamette Valley, often have less robust recycling services. So the the benefits are not equitably shared. And the burdens of our recycling system are not equitably distributed either. Those who work in these processing facilities bear a very significant burden every day when they go to work. Those of us who are able to just mix our recyclables together with no effort and toss them out in a cart and have someone, drive it away, we shift the burden of sorting onto other people who do the sorting for us. There's also social burdens when we export materials that are contaminated with plastics that get dumped in other countries and pollute the environment there. So the committee started looking at those issues. We only scratched the surface, but it did result in some meaningful elements in the consensus proposal that we'll share in a few minutes. We also undertook some fairly extensive engagement with the public. We held a large public workshop in January of last year. And following that workshop, we had a statewide survey. We traveled the state in the last months before COVID shut things down. We traveled the state and we met with more than 50 local governments across the state. That was last spring, and then we followed up again in the fall with webinars and phone calls. We had several meetings that really focused on listening to and talking with stakeholders that are typically not represented in these discussions. And that includes people that live in apartments, people that live in rural Oregon, unhoused community members, and the frontline workers in those facilities that sort our recyclables. Their voices are all very important and they're very rarely heard. So we went out of our way to start to hear some of those voices. And in all of those conversations, there were a few constant themes. we heard dissatisfaction with how Oregon's recycling system relies exclusively on ratepayers to fund it. And we heard support for policy frameworks that would share that responsibility with producers. And that support was mirrored in that poll that Lauren asked of you a few minutes ago. So in addition to all that research, we also did did a hard look at Oregon's existing infrastructure for recycling and how that infrastructure could change. We looked at different options, including different materials that we might collect, different methods of collecting those materials, and also different processing technologies for sorting those materials out. For each of those different infrastructure options, we evaluated the costs in terms of items such as labor, trucks, fuel, and freight. Those are all very important to the economics of recycling. But we also brought into this evaluation an evaluation of environmental impacts and their associated cost to society. So as an example of that, there's pollution when materials are transported, and there's pollution when virgin resources are made into new materials. The act of collecting recycling increases pollution from collection trucks, but it decreases pollution in manufacturing. Typically, in almost all cases, the net result is a reduction in pollution, and that's one reason we support recycling. That pollution has very real human health costs. It makes people sick. It sends them to the hospital. It causes disability, which causes disruptions for individuals and families. People lose income. Some people die from pollution. And all of those impacts have costs to society. We pay these costs through the healthcare system. We pay for it through insurance premiums. It's part of the cost of our use of materials. And society pays those costs, but the producers of these materials that cause the pollution do not pay these costs. And the result generally is an underinvestment in recycling. So what we did in this study is we estimated those costs, the costs and the cost reductions. We expressed them in dollars, and we lined them up along with the costs such as fuel and labor and freight. This was really groundbreaking work. And the results suggest that the benefits to society of modernizing recycling and expanding recycling, if you account for the full costs, will likely outweigh the cost of expanding recycling. That is, it's a good return on investment. When you look at the big picture and the cost that everybody pays, more recycling and better recycling is worth it, even though someone will have to pay those costs. And we're confident in this finding because our assessment of environmental costs was actually quite limited. As an example of this, our current recycling system leaks plastics into the world's oceans. And there are very real costs to the environment and to people from that plastic pollution. The proposal from the Recycling Steering Committee will reduce the amount of plastics that leak into the oceans from our recycling system. And there will be benefits to that. Environmental benefits, social benefits, financial benefits. We have no way of estimating those particular benefits. So our evaluation of social and environmental benefits was limited. And even though we didn't add everything up, we still showed that modernizing and expanding recycling is a good thing to do. All right, let's go to the next slide. So, after 2.5 years of study, research, listening, meetings, and deliberation, a lot of debate and a lot of deliberation, the Recycling Steering Committee this last September found consensus on a comprehensive recommendation to modernize Oregon's recycling system. This consensus proposal was negotiated so that every member of the steering committee would support it. And we did that because we want to go into Salem, into the state legislature, with a workable solution that all of the key partners in Oregon's current recycling system will support. The steering committee did not iron out all of the details, and we're still working on some of those unfinished details, and we'll share a few of those in a few minutes. But with the architecture, the framework of a consensus agreement, we turned our attention to drafting legislation. In Oregon, the way that works is it results in something called a legislative concept. And back in November, just 2 months ago, the attorneys down in Salem turned around and presented to us what's called Legislative Concept 578. And this legislative concept is the very first attempt to take the consensus agreement and put it into a bill. That legislative concept has now been introduced, or excuse me, will be introduced the day after tomorrow in Salem as House Bill 2065. And we're working now to prepare the first amendment to that draft. Again, it's just a first draft. There's a lot of details that still have to be ironed out, and we're hard at work on that. But we do have a House Bill 2065 that will be introduced. And hopefully it will start to move as Oregon's legislature gets to work 2 days from now. So with that, I think we're going to ask our second poll question. If we could bring that up, please. Okay.
I'm going to let you say in English, David, and then Leticia will interpret the Spanish. And to remind people, some people came in later and didn't get to do the first poll. It turns out because I did the poll in both English and Spanish, you have to vote in both English and Spanish. So just put the click in the same place that you did in your language. Sorry about that. It's the first time I've done a poll bilingual. Okay, David, are you reading the question?
Okay. I'm not seeing the poll, so do you have it up for people?
Let's try it again. Oh. Ay, ay, ay. No, 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 no. Relaunch poll. There we go.
Okay, here we go. Thank you. Here's the question. So Oregon's Recycling Steering Committee had 3 goals. The first was to optimize environmental benefits. The second was to create a recovery system that is strong and resilient. And what do you think the third goal was? Was it to support innovation, restore and maintain public trust, or recycle toothbrushes?
You have 30 seconds to vote. Oh, I see. That's how many we had so far. We'll give it another 30 seconds. Okay, does anybody need more time to vote? Okay, I'm going to end the polling. Oh. Okay, good. Thank you, Amber, for adding that in. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like everyone believes that it's restore and maintain public trust, or most, we got 60% there, or 82% with that.
Good job.
Okay, and indeed,
Yay.
Yep, that was the third objective of the Recycling Steering Committee. So we'll take a pause here and see if there's any quick questions we can answer.
There were some comments as you were going through and some questions. One person said, a couple people really appreciated that you were focusing on the material recovery facilities, and that they knew was really important. One person saw an article about electric garbage trucks and recycling trucks. I know if you have comments about that. And then one person is asking what, I'll let you go ahead and answer those two, respond to either of those. Any response to that?
On the
Sorry, I'm
comments,
having technology problems.
Oh, okay.
On the comments, just thank you for sharing, folks. I'm not sure I have any responses. I will note reaching out to the material recovery facility workers was something the first time we have done that, and there's all of this, I should say too, all the research David mentioned, there are many detailed reports and summaries on DEQ's website. So if there's anything you're more interested in diving into the details, we'll share a link to our webpage, and you can find all those juicy details and reports online there. And so that's to say, for the material recovery facility worker outreach, we have a report that summarizes the interviews and outreach we did with those folks. And yeah, that's all I'll say about those couple of comments.
Great. And there's some questions about more details about the policy. Are you going to be getting into those in the next section? Yes, so maybe we'll get some of that.
That's what's next. Yep.
Let's see. And then, yeah, again, questions about how can we support the House Bill 2065. I think that we'll be talking more at the end about each of our local master recycle programs. Will probably work to reach out to you all and when there's opportunity for us to get involved, but we'll hear more about that as well. Then I'm not sure what the question, what about cleaner burning? Covanta isn't hot enough to make the emissions clean.
So this, just to say that this project was, we didn't get into that topic, that issue of waste to energy or the burning facility, Covanta. So it kind of wasn't on the docket or in the scope of the project. Anything you would add to that, David?
No, only that I can understand your frustration, but when you see the proposal that Sana is going to introduce in a moment, and you see how comprehensive it is, you might be surprised it doesn't solve all the world's problems, but we cannot solve all the world's problems with one piece of legislation. Sorry.
And for master recyclers who don't live in the Marion County, the question is about the incineration that they do in Marion County. We don't really do that up here, but they do in Marion County. But it looks like one more question popped in before we move to the next section. Oh no, it looks like maybe two. Okay, this goes back to the first part, is the fact that the waste products often are composed of two or more different recyclable materials bound together cause them to be discarded to landfill or incineration instead of being separated and recycled?
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons why some materials cannot be recycled is because they are combinations of different materials. And that's not always a bad thing from an environmental perspective. Sometimes, for example, these super lightweight packages, even though they have to be disposed of and you can't recycle them, they have a lower environmental impact than a heavy material, even if you recycle it. So we're not trying to make everything recyclable in Oregon with this proposal, although there are cases where it would be better to make packaging more recyclable and the proposal we'll share in just a moment tries to do that.
Can you speak to that, David, in terms of will this incent companies to recycle instead of choose recyclable materials over things that actually would probably be a better environmental impact?
Well, the overarching goal of the bill is to reduce environmental impact.
Okay.
So we hope that the bill will create incentives that will support recycling and do it in a way that reduces overall impacts.
Great. And we'll learn what that means in the next section, it sounds like. Yeah. Okay. Looks like we covered the questions that we have so far. So you want to go to the next section?
Yes, I will pick it up from here. So thank you, David, and thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone for your good questions. So now we're going to get into the actual components of the draft legislation that sounds like you're all interested in. So this proposal, which as David has mentioned, is House Bill 2065. And so that's the formal bill number, and it's a House bill, so that means it will be introduced into the House of Representatives in the state legislature rather than into the Senate. So that's, if you're looking out for bill numbers and things, that's the bill number, House Bill 2065. And it proposes extensive changes to state policy to modernize Oregon's recycling system, as we've been talking about this evening. So to get into some of those details and roles, it's a shared responsibility framework. And so what that means is it gives those producers, those brands and manufacturers, new obligations to help modernize, update, and improve the recycling system. It also updates the roles of many of the existing players in the system, like local governments, those material recovery facilities, and our agency, Oregon DEQ. And it also protects ratepayers from additional costs. So we see this as delivering on the guarantees that have already been made about what the recycling system is supposed to do. And so it prevents ratepayers from paying more as a result of these particular improvements and changes. And it's a unique and hybrid kind of construction to meet Oregon's needs that resulted from this consensus and negotiation process. So shared responsibility really means that producers will be responsible for some elements of the recycling system, and local governments, ratepayers, and processing facilities will maintain responsibility for others. It's truly shared. It's different than other extended producer responsibility programs that are being proposed in Oregon as well as in other states. Ratepayers will continue to pay most of the existing costs, and then otherwise the cost of improvement will be borne by producers, as I mentioned. And it will maintain the parts of the system that work well and improve others that were never considered or perhaps didn't even exist when our recycling framework was first built. And fundamentally, the intention is to start internalizing the environmental and social costs of the products into the price of those products, which are currently paid by ratepayers, and the environment, as we have talked about, when no one pays for certain costs, the environment bears that burden. And also to provide stability, it will shift the volatility of these global commodity markets where recycling materials are sold, shifts it away from local governments and ratepayers and onto producers. And a last note is that it maintains a somewhat more level playing field for in-state businesses. So local Oregon businesses won't experience any disproportionate burden because it regulates all businesses that sell into the state, not just the ones that are located or manufacture here. And so a few other comments before we get into the real nitty-gritty. there were many questions about producers and their opinions about this kind of a system. And so we want to share how there's this momentum David mentioned has been growing. So here is a quote that actually was in an OPB article from a couple months back from a producer organization called, a trade association called AmeriPen, which represents packaging supply chain companies like PepsiCo and Dow Chemical that David mentioned. And in fact, that the link, I just added this, there was a new article today that came out in a recycling publication called Resource Recycling that talks even more about this organization and its member companies and their position and willingness to go along with a proposal like this. We don't agree on every single element, but as David said, big difference than even 1 year ago. So the proposal, HB 2065, we're going to kind of start at the end, going into the details of the proposal, start at the end of the beginning of the system. If you're holding that plastic tub or that jar of a bottle of toothpaste, tube of toothpaste or other product in your hand and looking at that label. So HB 2065 includes new truth in labeling standards that will help address public confusion. So basically a package or product cannot say it is recyclable in Oregon if it's not actually recyclable in Oregon. And that's kind of paired with a lot of other important stuff. Many of these elements are dependent on each other. So these points are about the collection phase of the system. So the proposal would create a uniform statewide recycling collection list so that labeling, it can work because the recycling rules around the state will be the same everywhere. And so this uniform statewide collection list will be developed in consultation with important players in the system. And it will also be made with environmental, social, and technological considerations in mind. So whether something is recyclable or if it's actually environmentally beneficial to be recycled, what are the social and maybe human health impacts like David was talking about in the research, and technological considerations like the capacity and the ability of our sorting facilities to handle those materials. Related to this element or this phase of the system, local governments will provide effective feedback to households and businesses that cause contamination funded by producers. So local governments already do a lot of this, but producers can help fund much more hands-on direct feedback to more customers. And local governments will also distribute consistent educational materials in multiple languages, so improving on the access to education and information in the recycling system. And local governments also will maintain local control of collection in their communities. So ratepayers will continue to pay existing costs for collection, as we mentioned, and local governments, not the state and not producers, will continue to manage those contracts, franchises, or whatever the current system might be in your community for how recycling collection is provided for. And so like which company picks up your recyclables likely will not change as a result of this proposal. So the next phase is this transportation and expanding collection access. So recycling will become more affordable in rural Oregon. Producers will fund the transportation of recyclables to processing facilities from more remote and distant areas of the state. Those material recovery facilities are concentrated in the I-5 corridor between Vancouver, Washington, and Salem. So it's disproportionately expensive for communities that are located further away from those facilities to have their recycling delivered to where it needs to go to be sorted before it is sold. So producers will help equalize the cost of transportation regardless of where you are located in the state. And multifamily communities and apartment properties will be able to recycle where they currently don't. Producers will provide funding for communities to voluntarily expand collection where it may not be required. So that's one of those issues David mentioned that was kind of more recently worked out that wasn't in the original language of the proposal. So small cities and unincorporated areas of different counties will have access to producer funding if they want to expand collection and either improve their drop-off or depot systems or expand the collection, curbside collection. There's also a recycling goal for plastic packaging, which is new, and producers would be responsible for helping meet that goal. And then lastly on this piece, producers would fund and operate drop-offs and mobile collection for special materials that are not collected curbside. So they may actually be responsible for making sure certain materials are recycled, but even if they're not appropriate for commingled collection, and then that's where they would fund and possibly operate that type of collection. So now I'm gonna pass it back to David to talk about processing.
All right, thank you so much, Sana. So as you all know, after our materials are collected for recycling, if they've been commingled, they have to be sorted out from each other. And Sana, I'm seeing a blank slide. I don't know.
Me too. Sorry, I'm gonna.
Well, Sana,
on this. Keep going.
Brings that slide up. I'll tell you about these processing standards. The state would establish new standards for facilities that process these mixed materials. They would be required to more effectively remove contamination. So, for example, those materials that don't belong in the bin, and currently they sort some of them out. These new standards would require them to do a much better job at sorting out those contaminants. They'd also be required to transfer materials to the end markets they're supposed to go to. So, for example, we've seen that plastic bottles sometimes get flattened and they get mixed in with the cardboard and they get sent off to the paper mill. Well, we don't want plastic bottles at the paper mill. We want plastic bottles at the plastics recycler. So there would be requirements that these sorting facilities would have to do a better job at making sure that the garbage is pulled out and the good recyclables actually go where they're supposed to. There would be new requirements regarding disposition and transparency. Also, very importantly, fair and equitable treatment of workers at these facilities, as well as intentional efforts to reduce the impacts on communities. So both producers and the processors would be required to, I'm sorry, I just got ahead of myself. Let's stay on this slide for a minute. Local governments would be required to direct their mixed recyclables to facilities that meet these standards, whether those facilities are located inside Oregon and they're permitted by the state, or maybe the sorting facilities are located in Washington or California or Idaho. Those facilities would need to be certified in order to meet the same standards and ensure a level and equal playing field. So we would use both permits and certification to improve outcomes at these processing facilities. Next slide, please. So we would also prohibit the transfer of materials to end markets, regardless of location, that cause environmental harm. So, for example, there's growing evidence that when Oregon processors export paper to countries such as Indonesia, the plastics that are included in that paper may not be recycled. They may be dumped in the surrounding countryside. They may wash into rivers or oceans. And we don't want Oregon's recycling system contributing to that. So whether the end markets are domestic or located overseas, we would prohibit the transfer of materials to markets that harm the environment in that way. Producers would be responsible for making sure that materials get to end markets that are environmentally responsible, and they would have to do this in a way that protects ratepayers. So ratepayers, all of us, that pay our garbage bills, would be protected from cost increases for responsible recycling, and we would also be protected from the volatility that comes with these commodity markets, because it's those swings in commodity prices that sometimes cause local governments in Oregon to drop materials from service because they're just too expensive. The proposal from the steering committee addresses recycling, as you've seen, from the start to the finish, but there's more to this proposal than just recycling. Next slide, please. Right, thank you, Sana. In House Bill 2065, there is a continuous improvement requirement for social equity, where the state would periodically assess social conditions and make efforts to improve upon them. The way these producer responsibility systems work, because there's thousands of producers, is that the producers join a producer responsibility organization. It's sort of like a co-op. And the producers pay fees to that producer responsibility organization that does all these projects on their behalf. Those fees are eco-modulated. That is, they are reduced for environmentally beneficial design, and they are increased for environmentally harmful design. So Lauren, you had asked previously about how will this proposal encourage materials that are more environmentally sensitive. And it's the eco-modulation element that starts to get at that. Also in this bill, we have a proposal that the producers would help fund efforts in Oregon to prevent and control litter, especially plastic pollution. And remembering that, that recycling is not the top priority preference for Oregon. Waste prevention and reuse are even higher priorities. We would also require the producers to pay into a fund that would be used to help fund local waste prevention and reuse projects. For example, we'd love to see more dishwashers and the use of durable dishware in schools. Marion County has a really great project bringing fluid milk dispensers back into schools, both as a way of reducing packaging waste and also reducing the waste of milk. And that's a very replicable project that we'd love to see expanded throughout the state. And again, that would be an example of a project that we could fund through this grants program. Just a few other details about the proposal. Next slide, please. What materials are we talking about? We call these covered products, and they include packaging in all of its forms, printing and writing paper, food serviceware, such as takeout containers. We're not including napkins or paper towels. We are not saying that all these materials must be recycled. What we're saying is if you are a producer and you sell these products into Oregon, you have an obligation to help our recycling program be successful and resilient. Because some of these materials should be recycled and some of these materials should not be recycled, but they end up in the recycling system anyway. And we need help paying for the improvements to get them out of the recycling system. So that's why all these covered products are included. When we talk about producers, we're mostly talking about brands, companies such as Nestle, Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, regardless of whether they actually manufacture the products or they rely on someone else to manufacture the products like Nike does. It's the brand owner who's the producer. In some cases, it's the importer or the distributor or the reseller. If you think about e-commerce, Amazon.com is the producer, at least as it relates to the cardboard box or the shipping bag, that they might ship to you. Amazon would be the producer here. So this affects e-commerce as well. Again, the producers will join these producer responsibility organizations that will meet all these requirements on their behalf. The producers will pay fees to the producer responsibility organizations, and those organizations will pay for the system elements that are needed for recycling, for removing contamination, for education, waste prevention, litter management, advancing equity in the system, and so forth. So that's actually the proposal in a nutshell. There's a lot more details. In the interest of time, I think we'll stop here for some more questions and discussion.
And before
Back to you, Lauren.
Great, thank you. Before we go into, I have a number of really great questions in the chat, but there's one person that's coming and going out of the meeting. I think they need direction to the Spanish. So Rosario tal vez está buscando el español, por eso se puede buscar un globo en su pantalla. Haz clic ahí y es buscar para el español y ahí se puede escuchar la interpretación. Okay, so hopefully that.
Hey, Lauren?
Yes.
And Lauren, we actually just have like 2 more slides. Would you like us to just go to the end and then we'll have the full time for discussion?
Sure. You want to do that? There's some great questions in here,
Yep.
but maybe you'll get to them. So let's do that.
Yeah, I think we might. So we'll just finish up here, talk about next steps. Interesting. Okay, so what comes next? Next slide, please. Okay. So legislative session was actually supposed to begin today, but it was delayed for 2 days because of the current situation in this country. So the legislature opens up in 2 days. House Bill 2065 will be considered by Oregon's legislature. We may have an information session or a hearing within the next couple of weeks, and then the bill, as we say, will start to move, which means it will be subject to amendments and lobbying and votes. I'm not going to describe the process to pass a bill. It's the same old process it's always been. It's just that 2021 is a challenging year with the legislature meeting remotely. We are working on an amendment that includes some of the fixes we mentioned earlier, as well as some other technical fixes. I should mention, this is just one of around 10 or so bills that have been introduced relating to recycling. There are several other bills relating to packaging, including a bill introduced by Representative Janine Solman, who is also a master recycler. She has her own bill. There are several bills related to labeling of packaging. There are bills related to plastics. There are bills related to carpet and sharps and the recycling of solar panels. And there's a right to repair bill. This is going to be mattresses, thank you. This is going to be a very busy year for recycling legislation in Salem in 2021. So there's going to be a lot going on. At a certain point, we prepare this bill and then it goes into the Capitol and then the legislative branch takes over, and that's going to happen very soon. The legislative leadership will be resolving the path forward for all these bills, and it will no longer be our baby. Someone else will be nursing it and trying to get it across the finish line. But that's the process in a nutshell. And I think that's the end of our presentation as well. Sana, do we have anything else here? No, we just have time for your questions and a good half hour for that. So thank you again. And let's go back to some of your questions and conversation.
Okay, so there's lots of great ones here. So I'm trying to scroll back up to where we started. So one question was comparing Oregon. How much do ratepayers pay in recycling compared to other states? Do we pay a lot more? Do you know in comparison what that is?
Yeah, that's a great question, which we did not study. It's a little hard to compare states because not all states offer the same recycling services. So for example, if you compared ratepayers in Oregon against ratepayers in Alabama, I guarantee you we pay more in Oregon, but we also have better service on average. One thing we did study was the total cost of the ratepayer-funded recycling system. And it's approximately $200 million a year that ratepayers in Oregon pay out in our bills for recycling services, which I think is a really important number. Anyone who thinks that recycling is just a kind of feel good, warm and fuzzy volunteer activity, no, disabuse yourself of that assumption. $200 million a year is a lot of money the public is spending for a service. And in our view, it's a service that is not working the way it should. It's not delivering to ratepayers the benefits that ratepayers have been promised. And it entirely justifies stronger oversight and efforts to make sure that money is being spent well and delivering good benefits.
Thank you, David. So I just put a whole bunch of the announcements that were earlier back into the chat if you're looking for announcements, especially in Portland area. So there were a couple of, okay, so one question was about effective, you had been talking about effective feedback. They're hoping that effective feedback includes customers, not just single family, but multifamily and the residents as well as the property managers.
Good question. It definitely includes multifamily residents. It includes commercial as well, businesses that recycle. And in terms of including the property managers, there's not explicit language about that in the bill, but if that's a suggestion that folks want to make, there will be opportunities to submit your feedback, and we'll take a note of that too. There's a level of detail that we get to in statute, and sometimes something that explicit, we don't put it in statute because then it's much harder to change. But there's a process of what's called rulemaking that follows after a law is passed in the statute, which is where this language would go. And so the rulemaking that follows can often be more detailed because it's a little bit easier to change. You don't have to go back to the Oregon legislature to change a rule. So it's possible that, well, it's definite that a lot of the detail of this program will be worked out in rulemaking that would follow after the end of the legislative session, and a level of detail like that may be appropriate for a rulemaking.
Thank you. I'm being distracted by a very cute couple kids waving at us. All right, so
I see that.
So was OBRC, the bottle drop, included in these discussions in the process, and what do like other recycle depots and such play a role in this?
So the material recovery facilities were involved. There were several of them. I think that was part of the question. There were several of them on the recycling steering committee, and we were very much in conversation with them through the process and in the work done after September to work out some of those additional details. OBRC was not on the recycling steering committee. They were aware of the process, and we have since been in conversation with them and are answering their questions and addressing their concerns.
David, you unmuted and then remuted. Were you going to respond to? No. Okay. So yeah, okay, I will not interject my own question. I'll ask you later. So there was some question about increased funding. Will it also provide oversight to ensure compliance of increased requirements? And later that same person asked, and also that selling packages that most likely contribute to litter, will it, funding go to that kind of thing as well?
Yes, and yes.
Okay. Yes, we anticipate a lot more work for our agency, for DEQ. So definitely producer funding will pay for our administrative work as well as the compliance, permitting and certification, all of that work. Yes.
Okay.
And on the litter topic, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we include food serviceware in this proposal. Food serviceware and food packaging contributes a lot of litter. And even if the material can't be recycled, the producers of those materials are still contributing to environmental harm. Some of the food service ware ends up in the recycling system where it has to be sorted back out. So whether the food service ware ends up as litter or it ends up as contamination in the recycling system, we think the producers should share in the responsibility for managing it appropriately.
Great, thank you. So the next question, the person who's asked it a couple times just turned off her camera, so I think I'll come back to her. Ursula, is that key or no? Okay, I think we'll, oh yeah. So she's especially wants to know, where are we bringing all this plastic that's collecting right now, and what are they doing with it?
So plastic that's being collected for recycling in Oregon, as far as we know, is being recycled. We don't know every single location where the material goes. That's part of the proposal. That's one of the things this bill would fix, is we would have more information about where the material actually goes and what it goes to be made into. But right now in Oregon, because of our current process, we can pretty confidently say that if it is collected, it is being recycled. We just don't necessarily know where it's going or what it's being made into. If it's not being collected, it's going to the landfill. So after National Sword, many communities took plastics off of the recycling list, not so much in the metro area, but in many other communities. And if it's not collected in the recycling bin anymore and it's going in the trash, it would be going to the landfill, except for those cases where it becomes litter, which the proposal also seeks to address.
David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. Sana said, if we're collecting it, it's being recycled. An important distinction. If it's on the list that local governments establish and it's being collected, it's being recycled. But the problem is a lot of people are putting plastics in their carts that don't belong there, plastics that are not on the list, plastics that are not accepted for the program. They think they can recycle them because of these misleading labels, the chasing arrow symbol, public confusion, lack of effective feedback. They think they're being recycled, but they're not. So some of the plastics that are being collected, if we're lucky, they're being sorted out by the MRFs and sent to landfill. And that makes the whole recycling system more expensive, which is a problem, because in this state, our current law says if recycling is more expensive than landfilling, you don't have to do it. So that's a big policy problem that needs to be fixed. But that's the fortunate outcome. Sometimes the processing facilities don't sort out the plastic and they get sent on to end markets. So we've toured the Norpac paper mill in Longview, and we've seen large piles of plastic coming out of the paper pulper, plastic that the processors, the MRFs, are not sorting out. They're shipping it on to Norpac, and Norpac is spending millions of dollars to dispose of. It's become so expensive for Norpac that this large paper mill, which is one of our last end markets for mixed paper, has put the recycling community in Oregon on notice and said, you got to clean this up. And if you can't clean this up, we cannot guarantee we're going to keep buying recycled paper. We may pull the plug on recycling and go back to the bad old days of making packaging out of wood, making paper packaging out of wood chips. It's more energy intensive, it makes more pollution, but we'll do it if we have to, because this recycling thing is becoming way too expensive for us because of all this garbage that the processors aren't sorting out. So again, there's a lot of plastic being collected that is not being recycled. It's being sent to the landfill, or it's being sent to the paper mill who sends it to the landfill, or in the worst case, it's being exported to countries that are trying to sort it out, and they're recycling some of it and they're dumping the rest of it and they're burning it. They're burning it in people's neighborhoods, or they're dumping it and it's washing into rivers and oceans. So the plastic problem in our recycling system is very significant. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about this bill, because it includes all the necessary ingredients. It includes efforts to reduce contamination at the source. It provides the standards that will hold the MRFs accountable so they process and sort responsibly. It includes the prohibition on harmful exports. It includes labeling standards, so you can't put the chasing arrows on packaging if you can't recycle it. And it includes the money that's necessary to make all these solutions work. So thanks.
Thank you. And so the next question is a really good follow-up with that. Is there anything in the bill about not giving out unnecessary items or for takeout, expanding the ask for a straw type laws that Portland had, the condiments, utensils, napkins, making that statewide?
So there are a couple things I'll share in response to that question. There are the eco-modulation elements that David described that would incentivize producers to basically do more environmentally beneficial design and distribution of their products. So if they distribute more material or put more material or products into the state, they have to pay more. So that's just the baseline of the fees, is they pay more for more material, more weight, more products. And then on top of that is eco-modulation. So they will pay less for things that are more beneficial or less harmful rather to the environment. So that's what is included in the bill. There's not an expansion of things like the straws by request in the bill. Again, there are ways in which this bill is not just about recycling, but the primary focus was recycling. So that's why that's not included. However, there is an organization that does have a bill that is looking to expand those types of policies statewide. Environment Oregon, Surfrider Foundation, they are running a bill with those types of policies. I don't have the bill number, but I'll see if I can find it.
Thank you, Sana. And she mentions in the chat, but I also want to say that things that we mentioned that we're going to hand off to you, anybody who has gotten this link will be sent a recording of this, as well as the slides and any follow-up stuff that I get from Sana and David, I'll be sending out. So you'll get lots of follow-up stuff from us. So there's several questions in here that speak to the producers playing game or not, and how will this law not make it so that the consumers, just the ratepayers, get passed on. Also, how do we hold them more accountable? There's a great question about protective language to prevent the producer cooperative from doing something that might be construed as industry political lobby. I know that even within our state here, we have quite a few different kinds of producer responsibility laws, and some of them do seem to give more power to the producers than others. Is there a model that you're leaning towards that would be better, or is there stuff in it already that you've cooked in to kind of respond to some of these concerns?
Right, great questions. Let me try and answer some of them together. Asana, please jump in here as well. So Oregon currently has 2 operating producer responsibility programs. We have the e-cycles program for televisions and computers, and then we have the paint program for waste paint. And we're in the process of starting up a 3rd program, which will go into effect later this year for waste medicines. So each of those 3 programs are structured differently. And we have learned a lot in the last 10 plus years administering those programs. Everything we've learned from administering those programs is reflected in this bill. So for example, in this bill, we require that the producer responsibility organizations be 501c3 nonprofits, in part because we want to limit their ability to use producer funds to lobby. And there's the question that was asked about Oregon Forest Industries Council by way of example. Generally speaking, the way these programs work, they are regulatory programs. The producer responsibility organizations and the producers are regulated entities, and DEQ regulates them, and we hold them to the standards in the law. So if the law is written well, and we're trying to write this one well, so it doesn't have loopholes, and there are clear standards and clear accountability, then we can enforce against a producer or a producer responsibility organization that fails to comply. So that's what we're attempting to do with this bill, is to create a regulatory structure that has very clear standards and expectations and accountability measures. And we're trying to bring forward all the pieces of the existing producer responsibility programs that work well and leave out all the elements of our first generation programs that don't work the way we would like them to. Sana?
Yeah, thanks. David covered most of it. I would just add that there are ways that the public will be involved as well throughout the process. So when the producer responsibility organization proposes a plan for how they will meet their legal obligations, there will be a public comment period every time. And each time they submit their annual report to tell us how they met their obligations in the law, there will also be a public comment period. So combined with DEQ's review and approval, the public will have the opportunity as well. In addition to an advisory council that I don't think we mentioned, the Oregon Recycling System Advisory Council, which is would be a governor-appointed body, 13 members from different parts of the recycling system, including underserved stakeholders and small businesses that are not part of the recycling system. And they would also review and approve producer program plans and annual reports. So those additional layers and checks and feedback to ensure the good faith acting of producers.
Thank you. Okay, so wow, there's some really great questions in here. I'm trying to sift through and combine them a bit. I'm hearing a real want for a call to action. Like, you know, who's putting together the letter that we can do to our representatives? Is there a nonprofit organization that's going to be acting as a lobby for this? How do we get on board? How do we support this?
Great. So DEQ, we don't necessarily play the role of advocacy and, you know, activating community. We can share that when there are public hearings and information sessions, those are public, streamed online. There are often usually are opportunities for public testimony. We aren't organizing necessarily like I saw a question about a letter that organizations could sign on to. DEQ is not doing that. Among your own organizations and networks, you could certainly do that. Master Recyclers as a program could do that. There is an organization, Bring Recycling in Eugene, is planning to be very involved. So for those of you in the Marion County and Lane County area, Bring Recycling is planning to do some of that work. So if you know about them, and when there is opportunities for testimony, anyone, so it can be an organization or an individual person, can submit written testimony or sign up to give oral testimony if that opportunity is available. So I'll also share a link to our email sign up, where we would make announcements for those large opportunities, like when we have a hearing coming up with the legislature, so you can be aware of those.
And those are really great questions. The Association of Oregon Recycling, are they going to be also taking a role? Yeah, so that's kind of a really good statewide organization that does get legislative action and work towards. So I'm sure they'll be playing a role in advocating as well. But it counts as master recycler hours to be advocates in your community. Get to know your representatives, write them letters. And I think if that's something that groups want to do, you as master recyclers could self-organize and start like creating a letter that you share with your fellow master recyclers and help them do a template and send it out to your fellow master recyclers. So, work with your local master recycler program coordinator, me being the one in Portland metro area, Allen and Marion County, if you want to get jazzed behind this. Okay, so Derwin asks, what's the biggest pushback coming back from this? Are you seeing pushback? I know David's spoken to that you're trying to work with industry, you're finding industry being supportive of it in some ways, but there must be some pushback.
Mm-hmm. Yes. David, do you want to try this one first?
Not especially. Sana, you?
Well, I'll say around producers and industry, they have really, made a lot of movement to be more aligned with the general approach that's outlined in this bill. I would say there are still differences, most likely, and we're still learning what those are in terms of exactly how they, in their ideal system, what it would look like. So their priorities are maybe different. They, as private industry, they want to prioritize efficiencies and freedom for their members to continue to design their products as they would like to. So some of the just inherent differences in their objectives and their business model is going to maybe be at odds with the public interest that DEQ is pushing for. And there will be, just for industry and others, there may be pushback on just if business relationships change. This bill keeps a lot of the system the same, but it doesn't guarantee that all existing businesses and players will be, guaranteed to survive and have contracts and live on forever regardless of these changes. So that's just a possibility, I would say, because of the nature of how much of a systems change this bill is proposing.
Okay, we'll let you just answer that on the safe side, and maybe you can do your own research on that, Derwin, to see if there's others who are fighting it. Yeah, David.
Well, yeah, just to say that, yes, there will be opposition. And the way these bills work in Oregon is the opposition doesn't make itself, they don't reveal themselves until you get to a hearing. So we know there will be opposition. We've had lots of businesses and business groups calling us up and asking us questions, and some of them express support and some of them are just kind of quiet. We know there is some organization to oppose the bill, but we haven't seen it yet because the bill hasn't been introduced. It hasn't had its first hearing. Once the bill has its first hearing and the legislature invites testimony, that's when the opposition reveals itself. And until they do, we don't know who's going to oppose the bill and why. All we can do right now is speculate, and we don't want to waste your time with our speculation.
Okay. Fair enough. All right, so
Thank
we
you.
have about 7 minutes, and I'm going to kind of collapse several great questions that are about the kind of holding the consumer, or you know, and also educating the consumer more. There's when are we going to start holding them, the consumer, the end users, responsible, charging or creating better communication from the hauler when materials are contaminated materials go into the recycling. How can we make it so haulers will give the feedback to the customer? How do we make it maybe, as you know, as they're going to be better incentive to recycle right?
Great questions. And I think the bill addresses most, if not all of those. So end users or recyclers, you know, at home will be, we mentioned that additional anti-contamination programming that producers will fund. That will be a new education, and potentially not just education, but things like tagging your carts, inspecting what's in your bin, letting you know if you put the wrong things in there. That will be, that's in the bill. And there will be, local governments will be able to take local measures to enforce against, for lack of a better way of saying it, against people who have a lot of contamination in their bins. So that's again part of the local element, that local governments will maintain some significant responsibility and be able to have a meaningful way to let folks know if there are problem materials in their bins. And the haulers and the MRFs and local governments, basically in some way or another, will have new responsibilities for measuring, tracking, and reporting contamination. And those are some details that will be worked out in rulemaking as well, of exactly how those function, but that's definitely part of the overall vision of the bill, is to create those feedback loops. David, would you add anything to that?
Nothing as succinct as you did. Thank you.
Great. And I think a piece to that too is that the bill responds to issues around the containers being, you know, the labels being confusing. That will help a lot with the contamination from recyclers as well. So, so we just have a few more minutes. I just want to give you an opportunity to, if you have any closing comments that you want to make. And I do want to remind everyone that I will be sending out all of the materials that were used today, a recording, so you can share it with folks as much as you want. I'm also going to go through the chat. There was just lots of really rich questions. I'll make sure I haven't missed anything. And if I see something that Sana and David might want to respond to in the email, I'll see if I can get those responded to as well before I send the email out to everyone. And I'll try to do it all in both English and Spanish, but that may make it so it won't happen tomorrow. So, Sana and David, before you do any closing remarks, I just really want to thank you so much for being here tonight, and every time that you're here for Master Recyclers. You're incredible supporters of the program. I know that you know that Master Recyclers are out there on the ground doing the important work, and that's why you're here. But I just really appreciate that and want to say it again. Thank you for being here tonight. Do you have anything?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Thank you for having us. Thanks to everyone who attended, and great questions. And I'd love to see the chat and see if we can help answer any more. And I'll put our email addresses in the chat if folks have questions. I may just put mine. David has his head down working really hard on language for the amendments we talked about that are coming up. So I'll put my information in the chat, and I'll be sure to get back to you all if anyone has questions or follow up. And just thank you very much. And I'll let David say anything if he wants to add.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Lauren, thank you for the opportunity tonight. As Sana said, DEQ doesn't typically advocate for or against legislation. But I do want to share what I have learned in a few decades of state service. And that is that when people like yourselves reach out as individuals and make direct contact with your legislators, that is like gold in Salem. It doesn't happen that often. Legislators are used to being lobbied by professional lobbyists. But when an individual constituent, a voter in their district, reaches out with their opinion, it does carry weight. They do listen. So whether you support this bill or you oppose the bill, whatever opinion you have, if you're wanting to improve recycling and reduce environmental impacts, I'd encourage you to reach out, find your legislator, reach out to them, and let them know your opinion. Recycling legislation like this does not come around very often. There's a lot of competing demands down there in Salem. This seems to be the year in which there is bandwidth, finally, to modernize Oregon's recycling system and the laws we have on the books today that were created almost 30 years ago and are so painfully out of date. So this is perhaps a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and I hope the state can seize it and would encourage you all to help make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Sana. You wouldn't believe how much love you're getting in the chat here. I will be sure and send you the comments, but people really appreciate you being here. And everyone have a safe and good night and take care of yourselves and report your hours. Being here counts as master cycler hours. And so be sure and report your hours for being here tonight. Thank you so much. Everyone take care.
Thank you, Lauren. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Yes.
Thank you, Leticia. Oh, I totally forgot to make sure everyone got to thank Leticia. She's still here.
Thank you, Leticia.
Thank you, Leticia.
Thank you.
Lauren, do you want us to stay on at all?
Thank you, Leticia.
Lauren, do you want us to stay on?
Nope, we're
at
good.
all, or we're good? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.